Good morning, everyone. Happy Saturday of APAP, and welcome. My name is James Lemons. I'm the Executive Director of the Lake Placid Center for the Arts in upstate New York, and it is my pleasure to moderate and begin the conversation today around reimagining, presenting, and booking. We have a distinguished panel a large panel today of people doing this work in the field and acknowledging that we are in the beginning of a transition in our industry into how we rethink the things that we've done for a number of years. So we welcome you if you're new to this field and really just beginning this journey in this practice. And we send a very, very special welcome if you are a seasoned veteran of this field, figuring out what questions to be asked and figuring out what potential answers may happen. We want to acknowledge up front that we don't have all the answers. We don't even know what questions we're going to ask yet, but we are committed to this journey together. And we know that with the brain trust that is in this room, we can figure those questions and answers out collectively. We only have an hour for the first session this morning, so we are going to forego the traditional panel biography. The first time you hear from them, we will ask and remind them to say their name, their organization, and their website, and then we'll let you use Dr. Google to stalk them online a little bit. But we want to jump right into the meat of the presentation today. Up first, we're going to ask Rika to come up to the stage and just help us, she has a video presentation, and just help us contextualize some of the issues that we are facing and that we'll be discussing today. So I will turn it to start over to Rika.
I think I can speak from here, if that's okay. Good morning. My name is Rika Iino. I use pronouns she, her, hers, and I'm the founder of SOZO. We are a contemporary arts agency and incubator, which is a fancy way of saying every day I get to work with artists to innovate spaces and processes of care and belonging, because I believe in an equitable future where more people who look like us can show up as our whole selves with creativity and collaboration at the center. I had the great privilege of co-chairing what has now become known as BEEP, easy to remember, Building Equitable and Ethical Partnerships, in collaboration with APAP, and Michael Reed as my co-chair. And it really began as a working group addressing force majeure. Hot topic, right? Everybody wants to talk about force majeure, right? But really evolved into a deep industry-wide inquiry led by multiple groups, such as Dance USA, shout out to Sandy Garcia, and Creating New Futures, which produced 200-page plus document on this issue that really examined a sort of systemic inequities in our field that have normalized certain extractive practices. And today I wanted to revisit the 3 principles that we arrived at. So let's refresh our memory. And if this is new information for some of you, welcome. Glad you're here. It's never too late, but now is the time. So let's roll the video, please. Thank you.
An invitation to set our sights on a new horizon, a better performing arts ecosystem. Join us by committing to using ethical, equitable, and transparent contracts and partnership practices. This is not a one-time effort, but rather the beginning of an ongoing process and impactful campaign aimed at long-term, sustainable change in the performing arts field. This is a call to cultivating a new, inclusive, and equitable culture where artist, agent, presenter, producer, and funder work together to build supportive and sustainable relationships and create agreements reflective of this effort, rather than those strictly transactional ones. To foster this culture of trust and mutual benefit in our professional ecosystem, we invite you to consider implementing these 3 practices. Adopt more equitable language in our contracts. Advocate for and model greater transparency around fees for all parties. Explore and include alternatives to invoking force majeure in our agreements. Together, we can change things to strengthen our industry through fairer practices, one step at a time. So much has changed in the last 2 years, so why can't we make our theaters, offices, stages, and rehearsal halls more just as a result, too? How do we work with each other to achieve what is both financially equitable and just? The sustainable future of our shared arts ecosystem is at stake. Let's root ourselves and our partnerships in care, imagination, and compassion. Let's move forward together on a new horizon. Visit apap365.org to learn more about BEEP, Building Ethical and Equitable Partnerships.
Thank you. Now we want to hear from our colleagues on just unpack those elements, the 3 principles that were raised in this video. And that may have been an AI voice, by the way. So please forgive in the
Thank you. That's the world
Transparency.
premiere of that video, right, Rika? The world premiere is the first. It's fantastic. So, primarily, I think the primary question I have to start the panel, and then we'll kind of go down the line a second, is where are we as a field? Why are these shifts happening? It's 2 questions. I know I lied. And why should we be going through this period of major exploration? And perhaps, Michael, we'll start with you down there in the corner. You can give an example, if you have an example of something new that you're doing and why. Let's hear it. Name, organization, website first.
Hi, folks. Michael Sakamoto. I'm an artist, educator, scholar here in my capacity, primarily as my, quote, day job as a presenter at UMass Amherst Fine Arts Center. I'm the performing arts curator and also the director of the Asian and American Arts and Culture program. So in that capacity, one thing that we are doing new, we are trying to make sure, in feeding off of the BEEP promo, trying to change the language. I was having this conversation yesterday about changing language, new language for new relationships. So having, for example, conversations, difficult conversations with the Office of General Counsel of a state university, explaining how we cannot monetize, not only not monetize the IP of our artists, but we do not, as the language of our IP policy states, to actually take hold of it and own it. We're actually doing exactly the opposite. But how do we break that, and how do we actually collaborate with those whose job it is frankly, real talk, to steal it in order to protect it? So that's really the, I would say, a many-year process we're in the middle of.
Michael, can I follow up on that just quickly? Can you give an example of bad language? Or what, I'm gonna put that in quotation marks, but
Yeah.
can you, I just wanna go one step deeper.
Yeah, I can't quote it because I don't remember it off the top of my head, but so the example I just gave, going a little deeper, the IP policy at UMass, I like how I'm bad-mouthing my employer at 9 in the morning in front of a room full of national people. So I'm a public employee. I have job protection, right? If they, essentially the language is, if we pay for it, we own it, and if we, not only that, but if we've paid for it, it literally exists to be monetized, period. It exists to be a commercial venture. Those words are actually in the IP policy. So that's the stark sort of reality that we're facing. And so in this day and age, when we're trying to be more engaged with artists and actually support them and create a safe and sacred space for them, how do we do that when the very institution exists to do literally the opposite of that? So
Does that include commissioning work too?
yeah, especially commissioning work.
Thank you. Tiara?
Hey, good morning. My name is Tiara. I use they, them pronouns. I am the director of advocacy at Whippoorwill Arts, also an artist and filmmaker. Um, so, just to get to the first part of the question of where we're at right now, our organization focuses specifically on working musicians. So, not the top 10% of earners and not hobbyists, but all the folks who rely on music, performing, and teaching for their livelihoods. We just published a report of our recommendations for ethical pay. So that video is really relevant in terms of grounding and the kind of reimagination we want to see in the ecosystem. But where we are right now in the ecosystem is that musicians right now are being paid at the same exact rates that they were being paid in 1980, which I'm sure all of you know, a lot of other prices have changed. So it's getting really unsustainable for working musicians. So the baseline recommendation in our report is that performing music is labor, and although music is a passion, it's a labor of love for many of these musicians, it must be paid. And that recommendation for guaranteed pay is surprisingly still not a baseline in the ecosystem. We also really believe, like what the video was saying, is that it actually benefits everyone in the ecosystem, from artist to producer to presenter to funder, to pay musicians. If you put money in the hands of musicians, we know because we make a lot of grants directly to musicians, they will immediately distribute it to everyone around them. They will hire dozens of other musicians. They will work at the local studio. It's a really great way to get funding into communities. A way that we saw this recently was at Whippoorwill Arts. Recently, we had the opportunity to collaborate with Northwest Folklife, which is a really incredible folk roots music presenting organization based in the Northwest. Their director, Benjamin Hunter, artistic director, is really incredible and has been kind of really pioneering seeing equitable, equity booking in roots music. So really making sure to hire global, like folks of the global South, and centering that within roots and folk music, and also to shift paying models at festivals. So last year, Whippoorwill Arts and Northwest Folklife were able to collaborate on a super folk festival. And for 50 years, the baseline policy at Northwest Folklife was that musicians haven't been paid for their performances, at least financially. And for the first time in 50 years, through a collaboration, we were able to pay their musicians $2,000 per performance. And so there are really, really exciting models for how we're reimagining the music ecosystem, and also trying to show that there are models that make it possible to shift longstanding business practices that do benefit presenters. So that's like where we are and how we're trying to change that right.
Tiara, follow-up question for you. What do you find is the biggest barrier for presenters or organizations or foundations to begin this work?
Yeah, I think something we find in our work is just there's so much. Being an artist is so dreamy, there's so much romance that goes along with it. It's like, life on the road, being a touring musician, all very romantic. But what we really need to do is break down some of the mythologies associated with being a working musician. What we are finding is that the top 3 priorities of working musicians right now are 1, guaranteed pay for performance, 2, consideration of expenses. So for example, if you're paying an artist $500 for a gig, do they have to pay $300 for a hotel and travel to get there? And the third one is small, the opportunity to pay for small, meaningful audiences, which I think is the most important mythology to break. Not every musician wants to sell out stadiums to play. We also know that, not every musician wants to play in a dirty bar every other night to get their income. And so breaking some of those mythologies of, what does it actually look like? Breaking down a performance fee and how that translates to a musician, because a lot of times when musicians go on tour, they come back in the hole. They're not coming back with money in their pockets.
And we'll point out, Tiara has handed me this fantastic recommendation for live performance pay and professional protections for working musicians pamphlet, which I'm sure she has some extra copies of. They have some extra copies of. I'll be happy to pass out or send electronically with our.
Yeah, please check out our report, recommendations for ethical pay and professional protections for working musicians. Thanks for plugging that, James.
Awesome. Ronee, You're up next.
I am. Good morning, everyone. Ronee Penoi, she, hers. I'm Laguna Pueblo in Cherokee, and currently the Director of Artistic Programming and Interim Executive Director of ArtsEmerson, which is a presenting entity affiliated with Emerson College in what we call Boston, Massachusetts. So, there's about 16 different directions we could go. But I first want to uplift that every single person on this panel has been making incredible strides in this space and is worthy of a deep dive to see the incredible resources, initiatives, really creative thinking and new programming that's happening. And while we're talking about this piece of it, I just really want to emphasize the real brilliance of everyone sitting here. So something that being involved in the BEEP work, watching some of the Creative New Futures work that is happening, I think something I want to emphasize is the responsibility we all have to change culture. At ArtsEmerson, we are a presenter, but we very much are interested in the ways in which we work with artists, if we are the right fit for the project, if we are kind of intervening in a key moment for the project, and more importantly, how it's going to tee up a conversation within a city of Boston that we want to have. And when I say responsibility to say culture in terms of our field, I really mean about advocacy wherever you are, because I've sat in both the independent producer seat and now the presenter seat for 2 years. And so much, I think some of the biggest obstacles, actually, to answer another question first, is this combination of fatigue and, it's just not possible to do because it is the policy that can happen on the presenter side. Often you can try to address the problem by working around it. And there's so many folks who are leading the way on that. So when we get into contracting, creative payments, I think that we don't often think that wherever we are in the ecosystem, we actually have so much power to change the culture. So what do I mean by that? When we look at a contract and some of the force majeure conversations that have been happening, something that I've witnessed happening in both chapters of my career is that when you add a climate justice writer, when you add an indigenous writer, when you add when any artist asks for anything, that allows the presenter to go back to their institution and say, wow, artists are asking for this, other institutions are doing this. So it would be in our best interest to move that along. And now we as presenters are putting language in our contracts that artists are seeing and going, oh, I love that. And there's this beautiful exchange that's happening. Also, Volcano Theatre in Canada is doing incredible work in this regard. That is really all of us working together to use what we've seen and everybody's doing it to really move the levers. And I think so many times we think about what individually do I have the power to do, when, in working with an artist, sometimes the simple act of making a phone call to someone that you think could also do it or might have a resource can be really transformative in allowing us to kind of align the resources we have in our system better. And while we can think about moving from this extractive capitalist way of transacting, I mean, we live in a cash economy, right? So, like, we do need to make sure that people are getting compensated for their work. And we can also try to model a more just future while living in this world, right? And we can just really embrace living in that kind of discomfort. So the last thing, example, yeah. So we did a piece with Wampanoag Nation. I think it was the first of this nature, in that it wasn't a given individual Indigenous artist, but rather about 20 to 30 individuals that were all Wampanoag and diaspora coming together to create a piece that covered pre-contact all the way to present day of Wampanoag people, and took it from the history books into what does it actually mean to be Wampanoag now. And that required a really different reframing in every area of our organization, and required us to work together. And for myself as an Indigenous person meant that I was having a lot of conversations with my staff about areas where I could put in labor and areas where I were hoping that they could actually fail, be comfortable failing and making a mistake and owning it and moving forward. Because if I tried to clear the way myself, it wasn't going to be as effective as them building that muscle themselves. So we did everything from kind of a packet of information for the production team on how to handle regalia, to having a lot of conversations with the artists to demystify how Indigenous people might want to work. They weren't really interested in doing a lot of engagement with the community because they wanted to save all their energy to do this piece that was really laborious for them. And they're like, we don't really want to do the labor of engaging with folks. You're welcome to do that a different way. And that's not often what you anticipate, but for this kind of engagement, that's what made sense. So I know we're talking about a lot of this is, contracts and relationships that are about exchanging money, but I just always want all of us to think globally about the ways in which we are partnering that, yes, are going to involve negotiation and making sure that on all sides we're working together to create something special and people are getting compensated. But, we all can actually move the needle forward often more than we think by not just leaving the creativity to artists, but all of us taking on the mantle of learning from each other and thinking about all the little small ways we can really make a difference.
Ronnie, two things strike me. One is what you just said about artists and community engagement and how they may not have wanted to participate in a traditional, but as presenters, we sometimes think of as community engagement. And the education and conversation pieces that we as presenters and organizations sometimes must have with our funding partners to help learn together what the new form of community engagement may need to be for particular. I think that's really insightful. Could you, as a follow-up, could you just share a little 101 on maybe what a climate change writer or an Indigenous writer may contain?
Sure. So back when I was a independent producer, something that in working with Phantom Limb Company at the time that we worked on was adding into the writer the not using plastic, right? And we also had to there had to be some institution that was non-arts based that was specifically tethered to environmental efforts that was going to be visibilized and present and have some kind of activity as part of the engagement. And that sparked a lot of conversations with theaters about like, oh, okay, so how could we do that? I don't know if we can do that. And the point wasn't to get all of the way there back. This was, I think, 6 years ago, but to move the conversation. And I think that's something that, especially in writers, all of us can be more both courageous and empathetic of, is something that's coming up in a contract isn't always, if you can't do this, then, get out of here. It's really allowing the conversation to get pushed forward so that where you land is somewhere not closer to the status quo, but closer to where we want to be. And so with that, we're at ArtsEmerson adding in our climate justice statement into all of our contracts. That's an ongoing effort. And we made a commitment that for any international piece, we need to have 2 other presenters in order to be able to do it as part of a climate commitment. So, and we're offering that in our conversations and contracting with artists as well.
Rika?
Yes, I want to talk about the sort of the nimbleness and the openness and the courageousness that happened in 2020, and how, from an artist and independent creative producer's perspective, we feel and have seen some of this sort of doors starting to close and or just dwindling, the efforts dwindling, and we attribute it to many things. First, artists are happier to be working. Yes, the allure of art keeps us tethered and in this sort of rinse and repeat cycle. But we also see that the financial hardship the field is facing. We're trying to do the same with less. We're seeing organizations facing pushback from their board and other constituents because they've diversified their programming without perhaps truly establishing a basic sense of solidarity in the organization, and or establishing their social vision, their moral North Star, right? This is the post-pandemic reality now, and right now, self-preservation isn't the answer. we can no longer call anything a best practice. We're creating those things as we speak. So yes, the beauty and the joy of art, yes, hell yes to that. But it's not an us versus them. It's not artists versus institution. It's not funder versus artists. It's all of us coming to a potluck party without dishes ready to be served. So we just have to be patient and we have to keep doing the work and we rise and fall as one.
I love that. We're coming to a potluck party without a dish. I love that. Last but certainly not least, Duke.
Good morning. My name is Duke Dang. I'm the executive director of Works and Process, he, him pronouns. So Works and Process, I'm an analogy person. So Works and Process, kind of like farm to table, supports artists from studio to stage. And we do this by partnering with 14 residency centers in 3 states. And here in New York City, we partner with the Guggenheim, Lincoln Center, New York Public Library for the Performing Arts. And during the summertime, we partner with Arts Brookfield and Summer Stage to present performance in New York City Park. But for us, what's very important is paying artists. And I'll go into a little bit of our organization history. Founded in 1984 by a very uptown philanthropic woman by the name of Mary Sharp Cronson. And she was asked by the Guggenheim to underwrite their performing arts program. And she said, I'm not interested in that. I want to make sure that artists get paid. So I'm going to create a separate 501c3. And I'm also going to acknowledge that because I was born into a very privileged family, as a patron, I was always invited to go behind the scenes to learn more about the creative process. And that's what made me appreciate it and be generous towards it and love it. And so I'm going to take that experience and provide it to everyone. And that's why at every Works in Process program, there's always sharing of the process, and we always have the artists there to talk about their intention and what they're doing. So fast forward my story. I started as a paid intern, college intern 20 years ago. I was born in a refugee camp, came to America. My parents had no interest in the arts, took an art history course in college, and fell in love with the arts and got a paid internship. But had no arts education at that point because the reality is when you're born in the 80s, there's no compulsory arts education. So this show and tell format of Works in Process is the backbone of my education, but also it's the backbone of our audience. It's the backbone of our audience development, the backbone of our education, and it's the backbone of our fundraising. And because of this built-in process and sharing of the process, we are what we are. And also, it's about resourcing these artists and recognizing that the live performing arts is always iterative. We're not a movie or a TV with a final cut. And sharing that process is the magic of what we do. And resourcing it is the magic of it all because we all know that artists spend a lot more time in process than in performance. So going on transparency, the way we work is we post our fees publicly on our website. It's based on living wage calculator. Well, I've been told by my finance person living wage because she doesn't want to deal with do you have 1, 2, 3, or 4 kids? Do you have a spouse that's paid, or are you single? So we base it on $1,050 per artist per week because in these residencies, they're provided with 24/7 access to studio and stage, adjacent housing, transportation, and we ask if they would like support in being enrolled in Obama. And we have an insurance broker that artists. And at each of these residencies, which are a week to 2 weeks, and when we commit to an artist or a project, commit to multiple cycles of fully paid residencies over the course of years, we match them to the right residency partner with the right facility for them where they are in their creative process. And there are sharings with these local communities of what work looks like when it's in process. And to culminate this, we share these iterations with our partners in New York City at the Guggenheim Lincoln Center the New York Public Library. And when we have a paid performance, we pay artists $400 per performance. And that's laid out, and everybody knows what they're getting into. It makes for really seamless contracting because it's just it's a multiplier. How many weeks are you in residency, or even the day rate? And the performance fee is the performance fee. And always we're sharing this process, even if it's a premiere, which I hesitate to say. We share the process. The artists are there talking about it.
Have you found that the transparency of fees, posting them online, has ever prevented an artist from being a part of the program?
I think yes, there have been artists that are solo artists that are like, that's not what I'm accustomed to. The reality is most of what we do is dance, and these residencies can be for 6, 8, sometimes 16 artists. And if you're talking to a lead creator, these lead creators are usually accustomed to, here is a lump sum, make it work. And we're approaching them saying, we've already secured weeks of residence time attached to housing with transportation provided and a public showing in this local community, as well as a sharing at Lincoln Center, the New York Public Library, or the Guggenheim with a performance fee. And we're going to pay everyone the same rate so that everybody in the room is like, are you getting paid more than me? The vast majority of the time, artists are like, done, let's do it.
So we've covered a lot of topics, and I want to just open it up to the panel to say, what have we missed? Have we missed anything? No?
I just want to quickly piggyback on what Ronnie brought up about writer examples. So if anybody is curious about artists and examples out there in the world, these have been, I haven't followed it lately, but as of a couple years ago when I was a little more involved in this issue. So Sean Dorsey Dance and Emily Johnson Catalyst. So Emily has a decolonization writer. It's actually on her website. You can link to it, I think, from the homepage, or at least on the top. And I haven't spoken to Emily about it lately, but having worked with her a little bit, we hosted a development residency a couple years ago, and their approach, her and her producer manager George, their approach isn't that it's a requirement, it's that it's a mandate, but that it's a conversation. I personally have the attitude that I would love for it to be a requirement, but I'm also not in the artist's, in this case, that artist's seat of needing to have a sustainable practice as well. So I understand the flexible approach. I would say to this room, though, is that it should be a requirement. Sean Dorsey also has, I don't remember what Sean calls it, but it is being a trans and queer artist and a company who's dedicated to that cause. The writer also includes certain policies of public engagement, everything from as simple as non-binary bathrooms, toilet access, to other things happening backstage in front of house. So, and there are other examples. Kinetic Light, Alice Shepard's, the disability protocols in their writer. So, there are lots of examples out there.
Thanks, Michael. And I can definitely say about Emily that all of that is still 100% ongoing and great. I work with Emily as part of First Nations Performing Arts that has a lot of resources on that website as well. I wanted to quickly give an example inspired by seeing Margaret Lawrence walk into the room, not to put you on the spot. Don't worry, I'm not going to have you say anything. I wanted to just uplift an experience that I was part of recently with the project Book of Life with Volcano Theatre out of Canada. And I bring it up because there was equitable partnerships and hard conversations around a major challenge that was happening with all of the partners at the table. And it wasn't easy, but it, I think, is a great example of how this kind of work and thinking can be transformative. So, on the volcano side, and for sure, I would strongly recommend folks to read about the work that Ross is doing there. Between this artist and initiative in Rwanda and this company in Canada, um, they use the language of co producing, even though, and usually for Ross, when he was initially thinking, okay, co producing means like 50% each, right? But when you think about the systemic inequities in our world, what different people are bringing to the table, like how would a Canadian theater company actually responsibly engage in a conversation about the Rwandan genocide and healing without Kiki Kitese's critical work? So there was a rethinking of what co producing meant at that level that really informed the ways in which they worked internally. Then, among all of these American presenters, we ran into a real crisis when there was a visa challenge, and it threatened and did eventually impact the very first stop on that tour. So all of us presenters, and just giving a shout out to Margaret for being awesome in this regard with the visa side, we're talking about, okay, how do we solve this? Rearranging dates, uh, covering a gap week that the company needed, and thinking about how they could creatively use that to work on another project. And then when the bill was huge to the company because of all of these changes, all of us presenters talked about to what degree we could all come together to chip in and cover that difference. And like I will say, I'm affiliated with the university. There are certain privileges with that financially, and I know that that's not something that everybody has, so I want to name that. But what was special and unique about this was the transparency, the frequency of conversation, the let's get on the phone and figure it out. I don't know what I can do. Like, what do you need? Do we need to call somebody? The creative thinking and that went into this was just such a great example of all of these values. And we weren't sitting going on a contract of, well, it's not our problem to have to pay for this. It was exactly the thing of this video and what Rika was saying. All of us were coming together to go, okay, how are we gonna get here and get to the solution that we want?
Yeah, something that came to mind, thanks, Michael, for bringing this up too, but a really big piece of the work we're doing beyond ethical, transparent pay scales is professional protections for working musicians. And one that we've really been focusing on is disability justice. So 70% of the musicians, 70% of musicians, working musicians with disabilities report discrimination in the hiring process. And 2/3 of musicians they report that they don't even disclose their disabilities because of how it affects their hiring prospects. So our big recommendation for that is if you are issuing a contract to a musician, you should always provide an access coordinator or direct them to a person to coordinate access. And that kind of ties into some of the community engagement work that we do, which is the way that a lot of the arts ecosystem works is that it's just completely inaccessible to huge groups of people. We know that children, that there's not a lot of arts programming that's accessible to children, and at the same time, humanities funding in schools is being cut completely. So many schools, public schools around the country, there's so little arts education opportunities there. We have huge populations of institutionalized folks, so neglected elders, folks in memory care, incarcerated folks. These are all groups of people who we know art, especially music, is a necessary social medicine for, who don't have access to it very, very, very often. So a big part of the work that we do is getting music into non-traditional venues. And actually, like, that is the way that we make like the equitable pay models that we see sustainable, is by really trying to expand what we think of as even as the performing arts ecosystem. So there's stages, but there's also community centers. There's also public housing courtyards, and all of these places are sites of music. And they're also sites where we can make opportunities for musicians to have like consistent gigs, that they can have like small, like meaningful gigs that are consistent that they can base their livelihoods off of. So that's a big part of the work that we do.
You mentioned living wages, Duke, but according to 2022, I believe, SMU Data Arts and Ford Foundation study, dignified wages remain the top concern for artists. During the pandemic, artists' average income fell from $33,000 to, I believe, $13,000 below national poverty level, right? But there are more steps being taken than we think. So these are great examples. Tiara's work, Beep, Emily Johnson's work, which is also accessible from Beep website on APAP, 365.org. But I also want to lift up the work of Wagency, which is a visual arts sort of equivalent of Beep, mostly in the museum spaces, but they're trying to standardize the equitable practices. So I invite you to check out Wagency. I also want to lift up Arts Forward, which was a granting initiative by APAP and Mellon Foundation that really arise out of Beep work to hold organizations accountable to some of these equitable practices. But I do want to say that the learning and unlearning is on artists too, that none of us are immune to the norms of capitalism, right? And the survival of the fittest mindset. So, often artists and managers, and I dare say creative producers like myself, are equally responsible for perpetuating certain questionable transactional behaviors. So at SOZO, we are investing in designing an artist entrepreneurship and self-efficacy coaching program to offer ways to build business resiliency, financial literacy, and provide creative producing support to really scaffold what is a really precarious process of cultural production for independent artists, in what is severely under-resourced for most artists. So there are ways that I think artists and other independent workers can contribute to this as well.
So looking at the clock, we do have about 15 minutes left. We probably will have time for a couple of questions. I know this is a two-parter, so we're going to roll right from one part to the other because this is a robust conversation, and we're not going to have time for everything. So I have a question, and then if you there's a microphone here in the center of the room, so if you want to follow that up with another question, just head to the microphone so we're prepped for you, and then we'll roll right from one to the other. So, panel question. I think we should acknowledge that the equitable practices that we've explored, that we've talked about today, and that helped guide us on are led by a panel of people of color. And I think that for those in the room who may not identify as people of color, but want to begin this work and exploring this work, how do they begin the process? And are there pitfalls in them beginning that work? And I'm sorry if I stepped in a pitfall just now, but I think that I think it's important for those of us who may not identify as people of color to know they can begin the work.
I mean, I'll just say that the responsibility of learning and learning not immediately from the BIPOC colleagues who have been in it for a really long time is a great way to start. Meaning, taking a deep dive into Beep, creating new futures, Emily Johnson's decolonization writer, and talking to your colleagues who have been doing this work. In whether it's artist to artist, whether it's producer to producer, presenter to presenter, wherever you fit, and watching, learning, observing what creativity is happening. I mean, I feel like the vast majority, 90% of anything I'm ever involved in, and like even what has come out of my mouth today, is because of what I have learned from my colleagues and learned from the people I have worked with. very, very little, I hope some, but very little has just come out of my head and been like, oh, here's the great idea. So like that is actually how this work happens. So being care forward in how you learn and step into this space. I mean, I'm a big believer in the statement to, if we take as a given that we want to change the world to be different than it is now, right? To change everything, we need everyone. Everyone. But not everyone is going to have the same place in this work. And it's not any of our place to say what every single person's place and way into it is. So it's, for me, there's an invitation to learn. And then after you feel like, okay, I got like a baseline of kind of maybe what's happening, then to really not be afraid to be a hypocrite or to fail and to go, ooh, okay, and keep going. Because we really need that mess. I mean, the things that got us into the capitalist structure we are in now and into the world we are now were really difficult. We're very extractive for a lot of people. So the way out of it is not going to be neat and tidy and easy either. So I think if we all kind of like go, okay, here we go, and I'm not in this alone, we can really do a lot of transformational work. And there's a lot of us here that are really excited to, I mean, and I'll just raise my hand to say, if you're like, God, I have no idea if I'm even doing this right, and did I just mess that up? Like, we got you.
Well, think about it. We're talking about things that are the most sensitive: race, money, equality, equity, like all the things that make people go, ah, that's what we're talking about. Question?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for sharing so much amazing stories, and huge heroes to you all. I come from a background of an independent producer, presenter, commissioner, and now I run a development lab at NYU, trying to bridge the gap between the studies of arts and understanding how to create a sustainable ecosystem in the industry. And so part of what I wanted to ask is just a call out to those of you working across universities to say, I want this to be a radical mission. I don't want to be a gatekeeper and say NYU has these things. How can we transform the pedagogy and the understanding of these assumptions and kind of hidden budgets, ideas of equity, and leaving artists who have these amazing crafts to try and figure it out, and in working with some artists that I still produce to think about how do you unlearn the ideas that we don't have to put a fee for ourselves in there, or we can't ask for dignity wages. So I guess a question to you is, some of you have already talked about open source opportunities for writers, and I think budgets is one of the ones that's still the most mysterious, and I try and open that up for both students and professional artists, but curious if you know other kind of open source places that I can guide artists to say this is the kinds of things you should be thinking about, and letting go of the fact that you're allowed to be paid. Even if you love your work, you're allowed to be paid. Thank you.
Anyone know of any open source?
I mean, yeah, I'll just plug the recommendations we just released for ethical pay and professional protections. It provides an artist toolkit that artists can use to, that's like a baseline hourly rate that there's a tons of research behind in the document. So artists can use that to advocate for a certain rate. And they can also always negotiate higher. There's considerations, several considerations that they can negotiate higher from. And we think that's a really valuable resource for artists and also for folks who are booking.
Website? What's the website?
It's whippoorwillarts.org. That is a long name of a bird. Whippoorwill is WHIPPOORWILL art.
Creating new futures, I will say again, is a very, very thorough document with lots of examples on contractual clauses and sort of deep reflections on those clauses. So that's a great resource that's readily available. And also BEEP is a document that has links to resources, including some contractual templates, I believe, that are forthcoming.
Yeah, I'm thinking specifically about changing the pedagogy of how we teach, bring in current and next, to really say, okay, here is the way things work, right? And not propagating ways that are no longer serving us. I think that there's some effort that could be done to pull these things together in a way that is a little bit more of a one-stop shop. And some ways I can think of is that so Producer Hub is a great open resource. It's a website that has a lot of resources, that has funding resources. There are videos on. There's one about force majeure with the delightful Rika. But I'm wondering if there actually might be something about working with a few folks to pull together some of these resources into a one-stop shop that has to do with the teaching focus. Also, HowlRound, which is a digital theater commons that is housed actually within the Office of the Arts, sister organization to ArtsEmerson. Anybody can kind of raise their hand and say, I really want to contribute some writing into this space. If it has anything to do with theatrical practice writ large, thumbs up. And so something could happen like a series that is specifically geared, where we could pull together some writing. There's already a lot of writing. I'm sure there may be something I'm missing, but if there's a way that we want to kind of organize to gather this information, I know I'm happy to talk with folks about that, because I think the information's out there. It's just how is it arranged in such a way that someone who is in that space can easily go, oh, great, I can just bring that into the syllabus. I can really think about this in terms of how I work in that space.
Perfect. One more question, and then we're going to need to do a quick transition between.
Sue Bernstein, artist. How are you addressing the situation of presenters who say they are part of a public university and therefore can't control policy and are not permitted to change any of the language in their contract?
Michael?
Well, when I say that, what I mean is, and actually, actually, that's no joke, because like Rika was saying, we're infected with the extractive culture of capitalism. It's in our bones, more ways than we may ever realize till the day we pass. Especially if we're public employees working in the arts. So I see my job a lot of days as a weird combination of being a translator and an activist and a kind of like weird subversive ghost in the machine. And so when I say ghost in the machine, I mean like there are certain things I can say out loud and there's certain things I can't in certain rooms, certain conversations. So I gave the example earlier, for example, of speaking to the general counsel. What I should have actually mentioned is that once we made very clear to the IP lawyer for the state university system that we were going to hold that ground and that we were actually here not to actually extract the IP, but to protect it for the artists, he actually backed off and he actually separated out all monetary reference and kept it everything else about the IP, and actually created, to his credit, created shared language that we actually use to this day. So there's I don't want to say in that case it was a friendly conversation. Ultimately, it didn't start out that way, but there are ways of collaborating and cooperating. And so to answer Sue's question, I think you kind of have to find the language. I was having a great conversation yesterday with Matthew Covey from Thomas Dot, who was explaining, I don't know if Matthew's in the room, I'm going to screw this up, but it was basically, the legal system largely exists, to protect those sort of extractive principles for clientele. And the language exists for that. So, but that's also an in, because the litigious culture, the system that we live in, also understands the use of language and the manipulation of language and the utility and the mobility of language. And so for me, if I start there in that kind of like, we know how this game works and where can we find the common ground. And you don't have to necessarily have this massive ethical activist conversation on the front end. It's actually a lot easier to just have that on the back end and just say, well, what are the driving principles that we have in common? I don't know. That's where I start. So,
Michael, how long did that conversation take from?
that was 2 Zoom calls and about 10 emails.
Great. Just so people know how to plan their lives, our university friends.
Sorry?
Just so our university plans know how long to plan their lives when they're dealing with contracts.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear.
Don't worry about it.
Okay. Sorry, the sound.
No worries. Thank you, everyone. We want to thank APAP for allowing time for this conversation. Thanks to our fantastic panel. Michael, Tiara, Ronee, Mika, Duke. Stick around. Part 2 is coming up in about 3 minutes. We're going to do some shifting, and we hope to see you soon. Thanks, everyone.
Hello, everyone. We're coming back. We're back. We're going to just jump in and start with a little call and response, which is the way many of our ancestors passed down knowledge and engaged. So when I call, you're going to respond. Beautiful. So this is just a nice call and response that is going to get everybody engaged. Here we go. Yep. Oh, you have to stand up. You can't sit down and do this. Everyone up. Everyone up. I don't think this. And we're going to start with our feet. Pie, 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 pie. Rodillas, 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 rodillas. Cadera, 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 cadera. Cabeza, 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 cabeza. These feet are my feet. They're not your feet, but they're all mine. These knees are my knees. They're not your knees, but they're all mine. Estas caderas son mis caderas. I don't believe you. A little more. Son mis caderas. No son de ellos. No son de ellas. Pero todas mías. This head is my head. It's up to us. It's up to me to open. Beautiful. All right. Take a seat. Thank you. All right. So, go ahead. Oh, yeah, great.
Hello, good morning, everyone. So if you're wondering, wait, where am I? What session am I at? You are in part 2. We just finished an incredible conversation with a number of folks talking about building equitable and ethical partnerships, talking a lot about the relationships between presenters and artists and funders and producers and agents. So part 2 of this discussion is going to focus on reimagining community engagement with the geniuses over here. So I'm now gonna, after a quick, wonderful flurry of conversation, I'm gonna pull back because this group's got it, and I'm gonna join this little panel. But I just wanted to give you some context, say welcome to the party, and we're excited to dive in.
So we're actually gonna.
Good morning. We're gonna start with a very quick, each we're gonna provide an anecdote about something that inspired us in the work, and introduce ourselves as well. I'm John Gasparo, co-founder of an organization company called Electric Root, and something that, you know, inspired us. We started a few years ago in the pandemic and, you know, reached out to a lot of early adopters who were open to trying new things, like the great women of Penn State and Sonoma State University and Miami University in Oxford, Ohio. Small rural town is a university 200 years old, and we just started doing Zoom classes, and that led to artist-led anti-racism work with the College of Creative Arts faculty, which led to trust building with artists and students and faculty and administration, which led into a Black Arts Initiative, which then led to let's do a festival. And for the first time in that town square, where they recently received a lynching plaque, which is something the state of Ohio is doing, we celebrated Black joy through radical hospitality, radical community, and radical joy. And it's now going to be in its third festival. So it's opened a space for real, true dialogue and community, and it's continuing to spiral in a movement.
Thank you for going first. OCO, y'all. I'm Ronee, Penoi, she, hers. I am Director of Artistic Programming and Interim Executive Director, word salad, at ArtsEmerson, affiliated with Emerson College in what is known as Boston, Massachusetts, also activist, composer, etc. And yeah, there's so many places that I could talk about the incredible work of ArtsEmerson that started in the 13 years before I got there. But I'll give just a quick anecdote and share that something that is so beautiful about the work that the team is doing is instead of saying, okay, we need to diversify audiences, we're really shifting the way we think about accountability and who gets to make demands on us. So what I love is that we, just give one example, we have a program called the Play Reading Book Club. It's in its 9th year. And with any of our works, we focus a lot on theatrical practice, African diaspora, indigenous work, but international is a big focus, and theater is really an anchor. And so we have groups of folks across the city meeting in libraries and other spaces over the course of multiple weeks before they see the show. It's a free program. They can also come and see the show for free. And it seems like it's a program to learn about the play and read the play. What it actually is about that group of people that normally wouldn't spend time together, spending time together, and the friendships that have formed over 9 years. And I mean, in my mind, the members of the book club that have been there a long time, like Miss Shirley, who I spend a ton of time with talking, they're my boss. They don't care what my title is or, how long I've been there. It's like, okay, what are you doing programming that? Or when are you going to program something like this? Or have you talked to this person over there? And I feel like they are who I'm accountable to, and I just love the way in which the work that we're doing is really shifting that model. And just to say, yes, it's a privilege to be in a university with resources, and it means that the responsibility and accountability factor to doing everything possible is so much higher. So that's my quick anecdote.
Beautiful. So my name's Ana Maria. I am the founding artistic director of Contratiempo Activist Dance Theater. We've been around for a little bit under 2 decades, so we're almost 20 years old. Amazing. I will say it was hard to come up with one example, but the example that I really that came up first was with a partnership with the Walton Arts Center in Arkansas that we just did about a year ago. Is the Walton Arts Center here? No? Okay. So that's fine, but if they were, I was going to acknowledge them. Choreography and dance making has always been community organizing in terms of the way I frame and think about how dance is made. And so part of that is that we have begun in the last 2 pieces that we've created is we do these things called community casts, where when we go and tour the work, we engage a local group of artists, of dancers, of movers, of human beings who are basically working with us in a deeper way and wind up performing the piece, and they really wind up being this incredible bridge to the community, and they wind up participating fully and having us really learn more about where we are and deepen the partnership. And in Arkansas, these folks wound up keeping in touch with it. It happens everywhere we go, but specifically this community cast was just continued to keep in touch with us. And many of them really wanted to come out and do Futuro Summer Intensive with us. And we talked to the Walton, and they actually wound up, someone who had been in the audience at the Joyous Justice performance wound up sponsoring every single one of the community cast members. So it was one donor actually contributed to having all of these artists. And again, they're teachers, they're community organizers, they're leaders in the community who came out for 2 weeks and worked with us in Los Angeles, went back, and then we've been in relationship with them to like basically have all of these community projects that are happening now in Arkansas. A year and a half later, the relationship, the engagement is still happening and is still is still rippling. And so I felt like that was an example of something that where the work, I hear you say it too, 9 years, right? The work is not about the one-offs. The work is really about relationship building. Oh, just kidding.
Buenos dias. My name is Tony Gomez, and he, him. I am the Director of Community Engagement and Extended Learning at Tacoma Arts Live in Tacoma, Washington. I'm also a working percussionist with a group called Trio Wada Levine and the board president for Western Arts Alliance. But mainly I just have ADHD. Having worked in the education space for a long time, I have a lot of stories from education, but I want to share something that's a little bit outside of that this morning. And anybody wants to talk about education-related engagement all day, we can talk. But we have a building that we manage called the Historic Tacoma Armory. It's an old armory building, and in that building, we have some space. Some of the spaces rented out to commercial renters, but we set aside 2 of the suites and created an incubator for BIPOC and women entrepreneurs in the creative and cultural economies. And this is a co-working space that is free to those that join the program. We also offer workshops and event support. And this program, we had the goal of serving 18 entrepreneurs, both for-profit and emergent nonprofits in the arts and cultural sphere. We have over 50, which is really exciting. And one of the other projects that we do is a co-production with members of this program. And this has included Latino Festival, as well as working with an organization called the Black Night Market, and Southeast Asian Comedy Collective. And what's interesting to note is that our normal presenting programs are around like 50 to 70% attendance. These programs that are co-programmed with community artists are at 80 to 100+% turnout. And the other thing that was important for us in this is that oftentimes the way that a presenter can be perceived is really focusing on rotating through touring talent, and we wanted to make an investment in the fabric of the creatives in our own community in Tacoma, which is Tacoma is to Seattle what Oakland is to San Francisco. And so that's been really exciting to make that investment and to see that kind of co-flourishing, to be a hub with work that is not all our own.
My gosh, thanks so much, Tony. Also, I just noticed the matchy keeps going with the pants. Like, it's actually really good. Yeah, we twinsed. Hi, everyone. My name is Joshua Deladoni. I use he, him pronouns. And I'm the Associate Director Creative at Arts Commons, which is a multi-venue performing arts center in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, which is also known as Mokinsis by the Blackfoot, Gutsitsi by the Stony, and is been home to the Blackfoot Confederacy since time immemorial. I wanted to talk a little bit about, just really quickly by way of introduction, kind of 2 different things. I'm currently obsessed by iteration. How do things change? And I'm obsessed by how all of the different ways people get into this work, mostly because I'm struggling with the difference between what community engagement means and what programming for stages means. I have a really hard time understanding what the difference between this work and that work is, and whether, in fact, they are actually different. And part of this kind of gets into the example. I've been in this role for this is season 7, and when I began, I had the great honor and pleasure of working with an organization in Calgary called Action Dignity. It's an incredible community organization where essentially all of these different ethnocultural groups, they all got together and went, hey, we all face challenges around racism, around access, and we have all of these specific community organizations for the Eritrean community or the Colombian community within our city. What happens if we all sort of gather our resources together? And they did, and they created this organization, which was the Ethnocultural Council of Calgary, and then became Action Dignity. I'll spare you the decent piece or the long-winded story. This is an incredible organization that essentially went, look, as part of addressing challenges around racism, we know that one, we need to be able to engage our young people across different ethnocultural groups. We know that the arts is an incredibly powerful convener. And so for a number of years, we started working with them in small groups to create small pieces, whether that's supporting poetry classes, writing workshops, things like that, all the way, and it built all the way up to a large-scale production in our one of our major theaters, and we attached a cultural festival alongside with it. Incredible work, and it really sort of congealed in a special way where all of these different, I say communities, but what I'm really talking about is like ethnocultural communities, saw themselves in, yeah, sure, they saw themselves in Arts Commons, which is the major cultural center in the center of town. They saw themselves there, but they saw themselves with each other as well. And I think that's the important piece. And then the big piece for me in this story is that it talks about an iterative process, something that went from something really, really small to something that went to a full-scale production, professional actors, professional directors, designers. And then that's a big piece. But then the pandemic happened, and this organization, because of their mandate, they hard switched. They went, look, we know the arts is important as a community convener, but what we need to do right now is make sure people stay alive. So we're going to make sure that we put all of our focus on getting food to doors and making sure that a lot of the newcomers that we work with essentially have access to healthcare. And I go, yeah, of course. Tell us how we can help. And essentially they go, there's really nothing you can do. We need to go directly to them. And I go, okay, great. You call me when you're ready. And the iterative process that I'm talking about here isn't some fabulous story about, and then they came and it was all like it's actually a relationship that's stalled. It's not the same. The other big piece into it is we had a major contact that is no longer there. She retired. She's off doing other things. And God, the woman needs a break. And so the big piece for me around iteration is this is a fabulous thing that happened. I know it's going to come back. And the strange thing is, and you'll see a little photo of some young people up there in a little bit, but the thing that gives me hope into this isn't the sort of major story afterwards. It's the fact that some of the kids in the photos, they're in post-secondary now. That's them now. A lot of them actually. Some of them work at our venues as their sort of part-time job, and I know that they will be back. I have faith that they will be back, and that's where I'm going to leave this because of the sort of murky nature of this work, and that's where I'm at today.
Go back and forth these microphones. Yeah, I think it's kind of interested in, and you already started doing it, but asking these questions, right? Like, we had this incredible conversation even just preparing to be here today, and what we noticed is not any of us have none of us have any of the answers, but that the nature of this work is about actually asking questions, being curious, that there's things that we're all kind of wondering about and dealing with. And so I'm kind of curious if we can, I wanted to pose a question, but then not for us to answer it, but yeah, just as a way to have us be thinking about things. I think there's a way that we talk about community constantly as them. There's this like putting ourselves over here and like the community as if it's this like weird concept of a body outside of ourselves. And so I'm just curious about what all of our relationships are. And again, we don't have to answer this right this second, but for us to think about like who are you in relationship to the people that you're in relationship to, and that actually how are you the community, right? How are we all actually the community, and that it isn't something outside of our bodies, and that there's this way, again, our language is starting to get weird. I've heard it a bunch already in the last 2 days about not transactional, right? We're not talking about, we're talking about how things need to be more in relationship and less about extraction. But what does that really look like? What does it really actually look like to be in relationship, and I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, it's like, all right, how long you got? Um, so what I'll say is that, ArtsEmerson being affiliated at Emerson College, it's a really interesting question of, are we the community? I know for someone like myself, who I think I'm still one of two indigenous leaders of a performing arts center that is not culturally specific. I think that's true, and if that's not true, please tell me, and welcome to the party. But it is an interesting question then of like, okay, this where does the institution part of the community? And I think the thing that helps us unlock this is two things. One is that very early on, there was a decision made that everything that ArtsEmerson does, that the art is the prompt, the conversation is the point. Like the mission is civic transformation in the city of Boston. So the things that we present, the conversations we have, the way in which we think about who the theater is for, which is different than who's in the audience. It's like, what are we for? Like, who are we for? Who are we accountable to? And when that is tethered, when that is clear, it helps unlock a lot of other things. Also, we don't have a separate artistic and engagement department. We have an artistic engagement team, which is, myself and Kevin Becerra and Susan Chinson, and they have different strengths and focuses. And so when we're working on when we're programming, we're thinking about what is the conversation we're having in the city? And we already know how we're going to tether that up. And then over years, we look at, okay, how can we continue that conversation? Or, we haven't checked back in with that community. Is there a programming opportunity, or is this actually a way to build connection across difference? And I think that's been the really exciting space recently that I'm really moved by, is that, and this is something that I've been thinking a lot about, is that we talk about representation on stage, which is, of course, critical. But I do think that at some point in our rapidly shifting society, migration and climate migration is continuing to move us, and we're a very faceted society. So what are the ways in which we are actually being very specific and connected about working across a difference in some communities? So we have a whole 2-year focus on Black and Indigenous kinship, and thinking about the ways in which, when you think about the history of this country, the way in which relationships to Black and Indigenous communities are foundational to settler colonialism, et cetera. So if we're thinking about the future, relationship and solidarity and kinship between Black, Indigenous, and Afro-Indigenous peoples feels really important. So we're taking that as an inspiration for artistic programming, for convening, and for long-term relationships with artists that don't even have to do with necessarily the work they're doing on stage, but how are we pulling them in to just keep being in relationship over time? So it's really, and just to say, like, again, for a smaller company, for someone who's not in the presenting space, it can feel like, okay, so how do I come into that? But I think that's also part of connecting to conversation part one, is that when if we create a environment where wherever you are in the ecosystem, you can come to the table and say, here are my values, here's some of my long-running goals I care about, and then here's what we have on offer right now, or like, here's what we could do right now. You're building a continuum of ways in which you could be in relationship over time. So I think the more we get away from product and into, all right, what are you up to? What are we up to? Is there? And that feels a little broader and a little, and again, not all relationships are that kind of coming together, but that's still a big part of the marketplace model that we're a part of.
Thanks so much, Ronnie. You sort of inspired me to sort of just share a little bit about something else. So, like I said, I started in this role about seven years ago, and it's not to say that there wasn't any community engagement happening at Arts Commons before. There was lots, but it's the first time that there was sort of a dedicated person. And you'll notice I introduced myself as the Associate Director Creative. that title around community engagement's not there anymore, and it's because of an iterative process. So it speaks to sort of what you're talking about, and really sort of where I'm going is, what does it mean to build on this work, knowing that it's not a linear path? It is modular. Things talk to one another and they come around. It's far more organic than a linear process. And what you're sort of talking about as far as other communities lifting other communities up and being in relationship. One of the other examples I just want to really talk quickly about is just an artist development program called Incubator. We started off by noticing that there's lots of different artists from lots of different communities that have work that it doesn't have a home. So we essentially made it was a cabaret series, a really simple cabaret series that grew into an artist development program. But the big piece for it, the big piece for me with it, and you can see Wakefield Brewster on the stage now. He's the curator of this year. Is that this program needs a curator who is not part of our organization. They need to come from the organization. And what it does is it allows that artist to find those individuals within their network, be connected with other individuals in their network, and allows us similarly to learn from the artists that are in that space. And just because you said those values, like talking about values, we literally put our organizational values within the contract to go, look, you can contractually hold us to these values, and similarly, I'm asking you for yours as well. It allows us to engage in reciprocity in those kind of relationships, which I think is just it's so key. And I think, well, not I think it is key. Thank you for the little interjection there.
Well, I'll just I want to talk also about this idea of the community, because I think we use these monolithic terms sometimes to refer to community, and I want to back up a little bit. Yesterday at the Community Engagement Affinity Group, we were talking about like all the ingredients that are here, for example, at a conference like APAP, where we have many different players in the equation, right? We have the presenters, we have all kinds of different presenters, we have artists and agents, managers, producers. And we talk a lot about audience, but what is audience made up of? It's made up of the people either, in the geography or in the interest area. In the panel just before, we were talking about kind of getting out of the economic terms of capitalism. Is audience is made up of people who are all part of social networks, and most of us, even in this room, we're like a Venn diagram. We're all part of this professional community, but how many dozens of other communities are represented by the people in this room? So I encourage folks to think about that, whether you're on the road and you're touring or you're a presenter and you're based in a certain geography, what are the different communities that make up that fabric of that place? And these can be cultural, ethnic, racial communities. It can be related to geography, class, profession, all those different types of things. And then what are we doing to make deep connections and to understand, that the horizon for this is not like, are they going to come to the show this season? It's like, are we going to be in relationship 3 years from now, 5 years from now? And I think that work is really important, because when you invest in it, you really start to see it come to fruition. So for example, the Festival Latinx that I was mentioning earlier started as actually in the community from a community association, Latinx Unidos, and then we started to partner with them, and then together that has gone forward and had a much bigger impact across the region, and multiplied in size over the years, and that's because of a long-term like showing out for people. And I encourage you too to like do the fun like homework of going out into communities, get lost, buy stuff you don't even know what it is in the grocery store. That's not the grocery store you go to. Burn your face off at a restaurant. Do the stuff to like meet people, learn how to say like, marami salamat, as well as gracias and thank you and come on, if those are the languages that are relevant in your community, and show that you're for real. I think that goes a long, long way.
And I think for those who of us are white or white passing, we don't often live in a discomfort. So what you're saying is like, how can we go into like be in discomfort? And when we're thinking of that, a question I'm always asking now is, how do we address or challenge or identify the systemic and institutional barriers that we have, why, which is why people may not be coming inside our spaces, because I know board members and donors and accountants love to see the ticket sales, and that's at the forefront of a lot of what we need to do. But that's what I think everyone is saying is the investment. But, what we've learned is that it's not interpersonal barriers, really. It's something that is not about you or me or them, or it has a lot to do with what has the historical barrier. I'm just saying barriers, but there's a lot around the barriers, of oppression, harm, what was the building built for and who was it built for, and the people that have lived in the community for generations. Why are their kids not stepping foot, so addressing that. Does anyone have experience?
Yeah, I mean, well, I'll say affiliated with a college in downtown Boston, which has not been historically welcoming in any respect for Black communities in particular, is something that when Emerson College took over took over stewardship of those venues 13 years ago, there was immediately a series of conversations about what the goals were of holding those spaces. And it wasn't just to, revitalize, to have another theater in downtown Boston, but very explicitly, and I'm gonna, bring in names like David Dower and David House, who really did a tremendous amount of work in this space to say, okay, the goal of these theaters is to bring people together across difference and to heal some of the historical division that we've had between Black and white communities in particular. Because that's something that, if any of you know about busing and the history of busing in Boston, the sense that, and I thought, Boston, Northeast City, when I moved there 2 years ago, it's going to be super, super liberal. And I had no idea that the people laughing are like, my former counterpart, who I adore, said that when he as a Black man was moving to Boston, he was told, well, how does it feel living in the most racist city in America? I'm like, what? And being there and seeing just how segregated it still is, it's real. And so from the very beginning, the goal of the organization was to break that wide open. And has it always been easy? No. Are we there yet? No. But it's very clear in the DNA that that's what we're after. And so in every conversation, and also in the conversations I'm having as a programmer, when someone brings something forward, I'm like, okay, if you're not advancing this conversation we're trying to have in Boston, then you may not be the right fit for us. And, is that maybe not great for someone who's doing something amazing but isn't connected to what we're doing in Boston? Sure, but I think that you have to, in a way, you have to be accountable to where you are and the context of where you are. So I think that kind of specificity about what you're up to, I think, and where you're at geographically can really help hone in where to go with engagement.
It's exciting to hear as a presenter having that deep connect, both commitment but also continuity in even how you're thinking about programming. Because I think that's also something I know that we've noticed. We've often gone in venues where we're the Latino check mark box, we're on the season because it's fulfilling something specific. But then a lot of the community members who are really excited and feel connected and feel reflected are there's never been a time where we've ever been invited any other time, right? And so feeling like that there's again, it's the model of instead of it being this check mark that we fulfilled this thing, we made that contact, that it's so much more beyond the contact. It's what is the thing that's happening after we leave? What is the thing that's continuing to be in the relationship? What are the ways that we're inviting you back and saying that it actually matters, that it's not just this one-off? And then I think also there's this way that when artists come in, they feel that, right? They feel the the commitment, whether it's this one-off or whether it actually is a relationship where people know each other and feel connected to one another even without us coming, because there are also artists doing incredible work locally that oftentimes don't feel like they've been recognized or they've been invited into the table. And so, yeah, I know for us, a lot of times it feels like some of the work that we're doing is like actually introducing local artists to the venue, saying these are actually people who are already here doing this incredible work that thank you for bringing us in. We love you and we appreciate it. However, there's these incredible people who are already here doing this. Are you going to keep being in relationship with them once we leave? Yeah. So I know we could have like 17 more hours of this together, but we wanted to do a quick do a thing. So can everybody stand back up?
And yeah, go ahead. I was just going to say, there's one more question as you're standing up and stretching your body, and hopefully stretching your mind. I was thinking how like oftentimes our lowest common denominator in this field is this term. It's very crass, right? Butts and seats. But first of all, how often is it just about the seats anymore? And is it really about that, or is it really about how are we relevant? Are we still relevant? Are performing arts centers and live experiences still relevant? And the answer to that question lies in what's important to the communities you're serving. So your question is, how are we relevant to all those different communities? We're going to do an exercise right now. We're going to think about the different communities present.
And a part of just, I'm asking you to get in your body again. There's a lot of discomfort sometimes with embodiment about like actually getting in your body and what it feels like sometimes to move inside of spaces and have to say hello and listen and engage in ways that feel sometimes uncomfortable is also what is part of this work. So thank you for being uncomfortable. If this is making you uncomfortable to have to move. So we're going to do, actually before we do, great. So first. And I'll start with one that I think. So here we go. Rise up. Rise up if you breathe. Good. Beautiful. And you can sit back down. Rise up if your ancestors were the first on this land. Beautiful. Rise up if your ancestors came here by force. Look around. Be with one another. Rise up if your ancestors came here by choice. I'm not going to participate in because that's going to be too complicated. So I'm going to sit here and be with you all. I'm just going to stand. Rise up if singing brings you joy. Singing brings you joy. Beautiful. Rise up if you've ever felt scared. Rise up if you feel at home in your body. Rise up if you wish you felt at home in your body. Beautiful. Yes. Thank y'all for doing that. Rise up if you are worried about climate change. Rise up if you speak another language than English. Yes, y'all. Rise up if you're feeling overwhelmed or exhausted. Beautiful. Rise up if you wish there was a ceasefire. Rise up if you feel free. Look around, look around. Rise up if you feel unsafe around police. Rise up if you have hope for our future. And rise up if you think your job can make a difference in the world. Beautiful. And let's take a seat. We literally have 1 minute, so I'm just gonna say a final word or phrase, and like really truly a word or phrase.
Kinship.
I think the answer is we put love first.
The answers are in all of us.
It's 3: humility, listening, and agency.
Patience.